Chapter 1. The Forgotten Planet. The planet of Xiferon was a desolate and abandoned world, far from the center of any major intergalactic trade routes or populated colonies. It orbited a dim, cold star, one that barely provided enough warmth to sustain the most basic forms of life. The air, thin and heavy with the remnants of a once thriving atmosphere, held a strange stillness, as if the planet itself had given up on hope. The surface was barren, marred with the scars of ancient cataclysms, huge, jagged craters from meteor impacts, enormous rifts in the earth where entire cities had been swallowed whole, their skeletons now buried beneath dust and rock. There were no sounds here, no wind, no calls of wildlife, not even the subtle hum of distant machinery. It was a dead world, forgotten by the rest of the galaxy, lost to time and to the merciless hand of entropy. Yet, amid all the death and decay, there was something hidden here, a secret buried so deeply that even the most experienced explorers had failed to uncover it. The silence of Xiferon was deceptive, for it harbored something more than just an empty planet. It was here, within the ruins, that a story was about to unfold, one of survival, of loss, and of an unexpected meeting between two very different worlds. Liam Thorne had never expected to find himself on Xiferon. He was a drifter, a man without roots, traveling from planet to planet, taking on odd jobs to pay the bills, never staying long enough in any place to be remembered. He'd heard whispers of Xiferon from a fellow traveler at a bar on a distant moon. The stories had intrigued him, but he had always been cautious about such things. After all, what was the point of chasing ghosts from a forgotten world? But something in the man's eyes had convinced him there was a truth here, something that didn't belong in the endless void between stars. And so, against his better judgment, Liam found himself at the helm of a rickety cargo ship, descending onto Xiferon's surface, the pale orange glow of the planet growing larger with every passing minute. As his ship broke through the atmosphere, the stark beauty of the planet's barren surface came into view. From the air, the landscape seemed almost peaceful, like a painting of an untouched world. Its broken cities sprawled beneath a canopy of swirling clouds. But Liam knew better. He had seen enough of the galaxy to understand that appearances were often deceiving. The ruins below were evidence of a once great civilization, long gone and left to rot in the corners of the universe. The ship touched down with a soft thud in a clearing surrounded by towering, crumbling skyscrapers, giant structures that looked like they had once been the heart of some alien metropolis. They stood tall against the backdrop of the dying planet, their surfaces smooth and metallic but now twisted, broken, as though time itself had taken its toll on their once pristine forms. Liam's boots crunched on the cracked earth as he stepped off the ship, the gravity of Xiferon weaker than Earth's, but strong enough to give the world an unsettling, heavy feeling. The air was thin, but it wasn't toxic, just thin enough to make breathing a bit more difficult, the air feeling like a dry fog that hung around his lungs. He adjusted the strap on his backpack, filled with supplies, tools, and the one thing he could never leave behind, a good, reliable weapon. He had learned the hard way that even a planet as abandoned as Xiferon could hold dangers, and he didn't plan on taking any chances. His eyes swept across the desolate landscape as he surveyed the surroundings. The once thriving city was now nothing more than a graveyard, a place where memories were buried in the dust. The buildings were shattered, their foundations cracked and uneven. The few roads that had once connected the city's districts were now little more than forgotten pathways leading nowhere. Liam had always been good at reading a place like this. He could sense the remnants of the people who had once lived here, their stories written in the decay. The loneliness of it was palpable, pressing against his chest, almost suffocating. It was then that he heard it, the faintest sound, a soft, mournful cry carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on his ears. But then it came again, louder this time, echoing through the still air. It was unmistakable, a voice filled with pain and sorrow. Someone was here. Someone was alive. The thought of another survivor, someone else to share this forgotten world with, struck him as strange, yet intriguing. His heart raced as he followed the sound, stepping over broken debris and through the jagged remnants of long-dead trees. The city was vast, its ruins stretching for miles, but the cry seemed to come from the center right where the tallest buildings used to stand. It wasn't a place anyone would think to search, but for some reason, Liam felt a pull to it. It was a feeling deep within him, a feeling he couldn't ignore. He was being guided, almost as though fate itself was pushing him toward this destination. The closer he got, the more the cries seemed to echo. They were more than just sounds, they were filled with emotion, a raw and primal cry that spoke of loneliness, fear, and desperation. As he rounded a corner, his eyes locked onto a sight that would stay with him forever. There, in the ruins of a collapsed building, a small alien girl sat on the cold, cracked ground. She was unlike anything Liam had ever seen before. Her skin was a pale blue, almost translucent in the fading light, and her delicate, thin frame was hunched, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face hidden in the crook of her elbow. Her hair, a cascade of shimmering silver, hung loosely around her face, and her small, pointed ears twitched in the breeze. She looked like something out of a dream, a creature from another world, abandoned and alone in a place that no one would have ever expected to find life. Liam froze. The girl's back was turned to him, but he could see the way her tiny body trembled, the way her shoulders shook with the force of her sobs. He felt an overwhelming surge of sympathy, mixed with confusion. How had she survived here alone? Why was she abandoned in this godforsaken place? He knew nothing about her or her kind, but it didn't matter. She was a person, and the fact that she was alone, vulnerable, and crying out in the vast emptiness of Xipheron stirred something deep within him. He took a cautious step forward, not wanting to startle her, not knowing how she would react. "Hey," he called softly, his voice carrying through the silence of the ruined city. "Are you okay?" The words sounded inadequate the moment they left his mouth. He didn't know what else to say. The alien girl didn't react at first, but then, slowly, her head turned toward him. Her eyes large, shimmering, and full of sadness met his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Time seemed to stop as their gazes locked. He didn't know what to make of it. She wasn't afraid of him, not in the way he had expected. Instead, there was a deep weariness in her eyes, as though she had long since given up hope. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out, only the softest of whispers. The air between them was thick with the tension of unspoken things, and as Liam stepped closer, he saw her flinch, her hands instinctively moving to shield herself from him. She was fragile, like glass, and the last thing he wanted to do was hurt her. "I'm not here to harm you," Liam said gently, kneeling down in front of her, trying to make himself seem as non-threatening as possible. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." The girl's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Liam thought she might cry again. But then, something changed. The tiniest spark of recognition flickered in her eyes. Perhaps it was the tone of his voice, or the fact that he had approached her with such care, but whatever it was, it caused the girl to hesitate. Slowly, she reached out a trembling hand, as though testing whether he could be trusted. Liam, with his heart in his throat, extended his own hand, careful not to move too quickly. The moment their hands touched, the air seemed to hum with a strange energy, an unspoken connection that neither of them understood, but both of them felt. Her skin was cool to the touch, smooth and soft. It was as if the very act of touching her had sparked something deep within him, a rush of emotions, of empathy, of longing, even though he didn't understand why. Her small, delicate form seemed to relax just a fraction, her shoulders no longer trembling with fear. She was still wary, still uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she had someone to hold her, someone who would protect her. In that moment, all the uncertainty in Liam's mind faded away. It didn't matter where she came from, what species she was, or why she had been left to wander this desolate world alone. What mattered was that, for the first time, someone was offering her the thing she had lost so long ago, a sense of safety. Liam knelt before the alien girl, his hand still gently resting on hers. The world around them seemed to fall away, as if the desolate wasteland of Xipheron had receded into the background, leaving only the two of them in the moment. Her delicate, translucent blue skin shimmered softly in the dim light, her silver hair catching the faint rays of the dying sun above them. Despite the harshness of the world they were in, there was something ethereal about her, a quiet beauty that made everything else seem insignificant. Her eyes, dark and full of unshed tears, were wide with fear, confusion, and perhaps a trace of hope. Caleb could feel her shaking, the tremors that ran through her tiny frame as if the weight of her loneliness had accumulated over an eternity. She had been abandoned here, alone on this barren world, and it was clear she had long ago resigned herself to her fate. He could feel her uncertainty as she regarded him, as if waiting for him to prove himself worthy of her trust. The idea that she had been waiting for someone, anyone, to show her even the slightest kindness struck Caleb with an overwhelming sense of empathy. "You don't have to be afraid," Caleb said softly, his voice steady and calm. His eyes never left hers, trying to convey sincerity through the simple, honest words. The wind whispered between them, the faintest rustling of the dead trees echoing in the distance as the harsh beauty of Xiphoron surrounded them. But for a brief moment, the world outside didn't matter. All that mattered was this fragile connection, this moment of shared humanity. The alien girl's gaze softened ever so slightly, and her fingers trembled as they slowly wrapped around his hand. It was tentative at first, unsure, but as the seconds stretched on, Caleb could feel the weight of her distrust beginning to lift. She had been alone for so long that perhaps she had forgotten what it was like to trust, to rely on another being. But now, standing here with him in this abandoned wasteland, she had to make a choice to trust him or to retreat further into herself. And it seemed, despite the weight of her fears, she chose trust. Caleb took a deep breath and gently lifted her from the cold ground, his arms cradling her small form. She didn't resist, though her body tensed slightly as he moved her. Her head rested against his chest, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she seemed to relax, even if just a little. Caleb's heart ached with the realization that she had been completely alone, her existence reduced to survival amidst the ruins of an alien world. She was not some unknown, distant creature to be studied or exploited. She was a person, a being with emotions and hopes and fears. And it was in that moment that Caleb realized something profound. Her story, whatever it might be, was tied to the secrets of Xiphoron, to the desolation of the world, and to his own journey in ways that were yet to be understood. As he stood there, cradling her in his arms, Caleb looked around. The decaying ruins of the city loomed over them like a hollowed-out skeleton, a testament to the long-forgotten civilization that had once thrived here. But now, it was nothing but a ghost town. The planet's atmosphere had long since lost its vitality, and there was no sign of any survivors, no one to witness the girl's quiet sorrow, no one to offer her even a fraction of the care she deserved. The silence in the air was almost oppressive, broken only by the sound of his footsteps and the faint cries of distant creatures that still haunted the wasteland. As he moved through the ruins, Caleb couldn't help but wonder about the history of this place. How had it come to be abandoned? Why was this girl left behind, a single soul adrift in the emptiness of space? There were no answers here. Only questions that would remain unanswered unless he could find a way to dig deeper into the history of Xiphoron and the civilization that had once flourished here. The path ahead seemed unclear, but for now, the only thing that mattered was getting her somewhere safe. He couldn't leave her here, not like this, not in a place where she had been forgotten by the universe. He had no idea what awaited them in the future, but for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt like he had a purpose. The alien girl, fragile as she was, had become his responsibility. And whatever the truth behind her presence on Xiphoron, Caleb was determined to discover it. Chapter 2. The Lost Civilization. The journey through the ruins was slow. Caleb had no real destination in mind, just the vague hope of finding something, anything, that could offer answers. He didn't know how long the girl had been here, how long she had wandered the ghostly streets of Xiphoron, but the soft weight of her against his chest as he walked suggested that she was exhausted. Her breathing was shallow, though she seemed to have steadied somewhat in his arms, her trembling body lessening with each step. They passed through corridors of shattered metal and cracked concrete, the remnants of long-abandoned structures leaning precariously against each other. The air smelled faintly of decay, and the quiet was so thick that Caleb could almost hear the ghosts of the planet's past. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by something far older and far more ancient than the alien girl. Eventually, they came upon a structure that stood out from the rest, a towering, half-collapsed building, its skeletal remains stretching into the sky like the final defiant reach of a dying civilization. It looked different from the rest of the city, more advanced, almost alien in its design. It was covered in strange symbols, etched into the stone in a language that Caleb couldn't recognize, but something about the place felt significant. As he approached, a faint glow emanated from the cracks in the stone, a subtle, almost imperceptible hum that sent a chill down his spine. The alien girl stirred in his arms, her eyes flickering open as she saw the building. She tensed slightly but didn't pull away, her gaze fixed on the structure with a look that could only be described as longing. Caleb paused, his thoughts swirling. It was clear that the girl knew something about this place. Was this where she had been living? Was this the source of her sorrow? He took a few steps closer, carefully stepping over the jagged remains of the fallen debris, and made his way toward the entrance. The building loomed ahead, an imposing monolith of forgotten history. When he reached the threshold, he hesitated. The air around the entrance felt charged with something alive, something that demanded respect. The girl was still in his arms, her eyes closed now as if she was gathering her strength. Caleb didn't know what was waiting inside, but he couldn't just leave her here. Whatever secrets this place held, it was clear they were meant to be uncovered. With a deep breath, Caleb stepped into the ruins, the door before him crumbling as his touch made contact with it. It opened with a creak, revealing the darkened interior. Inside, the walls were lined with strange, pulsating lights that flickered like a heartbeat, their glow faint but persistent. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old, forgotten technology. The room was massive, filled with shelves of broken devices, alien relics that Caleb couldn't even begin to identify, and rows upon rows of crystalline formations embedded in the walls. The structure had once been something of great importance, perhaps a research facility or a place of worship. Now, it was a crypt, a monument to what had once been, left to rot in the silence of Zypheron. The girl stirred again, her small form shifting slightly in Caleb's arms. She opened her eyes, her gaze falling on the glowing crystals embedded in the walls. A soft gasp escaped her lips, her hands trembling as she reached out, touching the cool surface of one of the stones. Caleb felt the change in her, the shift in the air around them as she connected with the object. Her body seemed to relax, her fear momentarily forgotten, and she looked up at him with something akin to wonder. "This place," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I remember." Caleb stared at her, unable to comprehend her words. She had memories of this place? How? Why? "Do you know what this is?" Caleb asked softly, his voice filled with both awe and confusion. The girl nodded slowly, her expression distant, as though lost in a memory. "This is the heart of my people," she whispered. "The place we left behind when we had to hide." A knot tightened in Caleb's chest as he looked around at the ruins of the building. It was clear now that Zypheron hadn't always been the desolate world it was today. There had been a civilization here, one that had risen and fallen in some forgotten epoch, leaving behind only fragments of its existence. And now, it seemed that the girl was all that remained, a living relic, the last of her kind. And then it hit him. The significance of her presence on this planet, the reason she had been left alone in the ruins of Zypheron, was far bigger than he had imagined. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the key to understanding everything about this forgotten world. And, somehow, Caleb had stumbled upon her just as she had stumbled upon him. The girl's touch on the crystalline wall seemed to resonate with something deep inside the structure, and as she gently brushed her fingertips across its surface, a low hum filled the room. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, a soft, almost imperceptible tremor that Caleb could feel in the pit of his stomach. The crystals weren't just for decoration, they were alive, in some strange, alien way. The girl's eyes were wide, her face a mixture of awe and sorrow, as if the sight of the glowing walls brought back memories she couldn't fully grasp. She leaned in closer, her small hand caressing the surface, and for a moment, the hum grew louder, more intense. "Do you feel it?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Caleb, who had been standing still in a state of stunned amazement, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I feel it." "What is it?" Her eyes flickered up to meet his, her gaze searching, trying to convey something that words could not capture. She pulled her hand away from the crystal, but the hum lingered in the air, like an echo of something far older than anything he had ever encountered. "These are the memories of my people," she explained, her voice soft but filled with a deep, almost ethereal sadness. "Our ancestors used this place to store their knowledge, their history. It's how we lived, how we survived when everything else was falling apart." Caleb stepped closer, feeling a sudden connection to the girl that transcended language. He couldn't understand everything she was saying, but he understood her pain. She was the last of a people who had been wiped from the galaxy, their history reduced to nothing more than this forgotten relic of their existence. He couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for her, for the burden she carried. To be the last of a dying civilization, to have no one left to share your memories with, it was a loneliness so profound that it made his own isolation seem trivial. "Why were you left here?" Caleb asked softly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Why was this place abandoned?" The girl turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and for a moment, she seemed lost in the past. She looked as though she was trying to piece together fragments of memories that had been locked away for so long. "We were forced to leave," she said quietly. "The others, they wanted to protect us, but we couldn't stay here. Something happened to Zypheron. Something terrible. My people had to flee, and many of us didn't make it." She paused, her voice shaking with emotion. "I was too young when it happened. I don't remember everything, but I know it was because of them." The girl's gaze darkened as she spoke the final word. Them, whoever they were, they had caused the downfall of her people, leaving this world empty and lifeless, a shell of what it once had been. But the question still hung in the air: what exactly had happened? Who had forced her people to flee? And why had she, the last of them, been left alone to wander these ruins? Caleb couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. He had come here looking for answers, but all he had found was more questions, more mysteries that he couldn't begin to understand. Yet, despite the confusion, he could see the girl's determination, the way she stood there, the weight of her past hanging heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just some lost soul wandering the wilderness. She had a purpose, even if it was one that she couldn't fully grasp yet. And Caleb knew, somehow, that he was meant to be a part of it. He had been drawn to her for a reason, as though fate had led him to Zypheron to uncover the secrets that lay hidden here. The girl turned back to the crystal, her eyes lingering on the faint, pulsing glow that seemed to emanate from within. "This place, it holds the key," she whispered. "The knowledge my people left behind. But it's hidden, sealed away. I can't unlock it by myself. I need help." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Caleb didn't speak. He could feel the gravity of what she was asking. This wasn't just about her survival. This wasn't just about escaping Zypheron. This was about uncovering the truth, the forgotten history of a people who had once been powerful, a people who had vanished without a trace. The knowledge they left behind, the secrets hidden in these ruins, could change everything. It could rewrite the history of the galaxy, and Caleb, somehow, had been chosen to be a part of it. "I'll help you," Caleb said, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out together." The girl's eyes met his, and for the first time since he had found her, he saw a flicker of hope. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there. She had been alone for so long, wandering through the wreckage of her past, but now, she had someone with her. And that small connection, that promise of help, seemed to lift the weight from her shoulders, just a little. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. With that, Caleb gently set her down, the weight of the decision pressing on him. There was no going back now. He had committed himself to this journey, to uncovering the secrets of Zypheron, and to helping the last of its people. The path ahead was uncertain, and he had no idea what lay in store for them. But he knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. Chapter 3: The Hidden Truth. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the ruins, Caleb couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that lingered in the air. The buildings grew taller, their skeletal remains reaching toward the sky like the bones of some forgotten giant. The walls were covered in strange symbols, the same symbols that the girl had touched earlier, and Caleb felt a growing sense of unease. Whatever had happened here, whatever had caused the downfall of the girl's people, it had left its mark on the very fabric of the planet itself. The girl led the way, her small form moving confidently through the labyrinth of decaying structures. Caleb followed closely behind, his mind racing with thoughts of what they might discover. He had no idea what kind of knowledge the girl had access to, but if she was right, if the answers lay hidden within these ruins, he was determined to find them. He owed it to her and to himself to uncover the truth. They reached what appeared to be the central chamber of the ruins, a massive, circular room with walls that seemed to glow faintly with an inner light. The floor was covered in a layer of dust, and the air was thick with the weight of ages. The girl approached a large, intricately carved pedestal in the center of the room, her hands trembling as she reached for a small panel embedded in its surface. She hesitated for a moment, looking back at Caleb, as if seeking his approval. He nodded. offering her a reassuring smile, and she pressed her hand to the panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, the pedestal began to shift. The ground trembled beneath Caleb's feet as the pedestal slid open, revealing a hidden compartment beneath it. Inside, there was a small, glowing orb, pulsing with light. The girl gasped, her eyes wide with recognition. "This is it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is the key to everything." Caleb stepped closer, his heart racing. The orb was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was smooth, almost liquid in appearance, and its glow seemed to shift and change as if it were alive. He could feel its energy, its power, resonating in the air around them. It was more than just a piece of technology, it was a beacon, a key to something much greater than either of them could understand. The girl reached for the orb, her fingers trembling as she lifted it from its resting place. As she held it in her hands, the room seemed to pulse with energy, the walls vibrating with a deep, resonant hum. Caleb watched in awe as the orb began to glow brighter, its light illuminating the entire chamber. "This is the heart of my people," she said softly, her voice filled with reverence. "The knowledge, the power, everything we were stored in this orb." Caleb stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. The orb was not just a relic. It was the culmination of a lost civilization's legacy. And now, in the hands of this alien girl, it was about to change everything. But as he looked at her, he realized that the journey was far from over. They had uncovered the first piece of the puzzle, but there was so much more to discover. The secrets of Xiphoron were just beginning to reveal themselves, and Caleb knew that the path ahead would be one filled with danger, mystery, and perhaps even betrayal. But whatever lay ahead, he would face it with the girl by his side. They were in this together, and that bond, forged in the ruins of a forgotten world, would carry them through the darkness. As the girl held the glowing orb in her hands, Caleb could feel the air around them thicken. It was as if the very atmosphere of Xiphoron had changed, as if the planet itself had taken notice of the object's awakening. The orb pulsed with a steady rhythm, its light shimmering in waves that resonated deep within Caleb's chest. The vibrations in the room grew stronger, a hum that seemed to echo in his bones, as though the orb were not just a relic, but a living, breathing entity. The girl's small hands trembled slightly as she gazed down at the orb, her eyes wide with awe and perhaps fear. She wasn't holding it as one might hold a piece of technology or an artifact. No, the way she held it closely, reverently spoke of a deeper connection, as if the orb was a part of her, a piece of her soul. Her face was illuminated by its glow, casting strange shadows across her features, making her look almost otherworldly. Caleb couldn't look away. He could sense the weight of the moment, the significance of what was happening. "This is it," she whispered again, her voice barely audible above the hum of the orb. "This is the key to everything. My people's knowledge, our history, it's all in here." Caleb could feel the truth in her words. There was so much more to this than he had initially realized. The girl wasn't just a survivor. She was the last of her people, and this orb, the one she held so delicately, was the last remnant of their civilization, the final piece of their legacy. It was clear that the orb was more than just a repository of knowledge. It was a beacon of hope, a way to restore what had been lost. "How does it work?" Caleb asked, his voice soft with awe. The girl's gaze flickered up to him, and for the first time, she looked truly vulnerable. Her eyes shimmered with the weight of the knowledge she carried, the burden of being the sole survivor of an entire species. She looked down at the orb again, running her fingers over its smooth surface, as though contemplating the next step. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "This was never meant to be opened. Not like this. The elders, the ones who survived the last war, they told us that only when the time was right, only when the galaxy was ready, could this knowledge be released." She paused, her fingers curling around the orb more tightly. "But the time has come. The galaxy is in chaos, and the secrets of Xiphoron cannot remain hidden any longer." Caleb stood still, watching her. There was a gravity in her voice, a weight that spoke of millennia of history, of lost cultures, and of the unknown future that awaited them. He didn't understand everything she was saying, but he could sense the importance of the orb. Whatever it contained, it had the power to change the course of history. As the orb pulsed again, the light from it grew brighter, and the room seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. Caleb could see the walls of the chamber begin to glow, the symbols etched into the surfaces of the stone glowing faintly, as if responding to the orb's awakening. The very foundation of the building seemed to come alive with energy, and Caleb could hear a soft mechanical click as part of the floor beneath them began to shift. A hidden panel slowly rose, revealing a large, intricate device built into the ground. The girl's eyes widened in recognition as the device illuminated. "This is it," she breathed. "This is the interface that my people use to access the knowledge stored within the orb." She stepped toward the device, still holding the orb carefully in her hands, and placed it into the recess at the center of the mechanism. The moment the orb made contact, the entire chamber seemed to come alive. The symbols on the walls flashed brightly, the hum of energy growing louder, and Caleb could feel a strange pull, as though the room itself was reaching out to him, inviting him to witness what had been hidden for so long. The air around them rippled as a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room. Caleb's breath caught in his throat as the projection began to take form, revealing an intricate map of the galaxy. Lines and shapes appeared, connecting planets and star systems in a pattern he had never seen before. The girl stepped forward, her fingers tracing the images in the air, her eyes filled with wonder and sorrow. "This is the map of our people," she said softly. "Our ancestors traveled the stars long before your kind, long before the war. They were explorers, scientists, creators. They built the foundations of a galaxy-spanning civilization. But something went wrong. Something dark came into our lives. We couldn't stop it, and we couldn't survive it." She paused, her voice faltering. "I don't know what happened, but I know that the war, whatever it was, destroyed everything." Caleb watched as the map shifted, zooming in on a specific area of the galaxy. A planet appeared, surrounded by ancient markings that seemed to pulse with energy. The girl's finger hovered above it, and for a moment, Caleb could see the faintest flicker of recognition in her eyes. "This is where it began," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The source of everything, the darkness that destroyed us." Caleb stepped closer, his curiosity growing, his heart pounding with the weight of the revelation. What happened there? What was this darkness? But the girl didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on the holographic map, her eyes narrowing as she traced the paths that led to the planet. Her face darkened, and for a moment, Caleb thought she might break down in sorrow once again. But instead, she turned to him, her eyes filled with resolve. "I don't have all the answers," she said, her voice steady. "But I know this. Whatever is coming, whatever was set in motion on that planet, it's not over. And if we don't stop it, everything will fall apart. My people, they thought they could stop it, but they were wrong." Caleb's heart skipped a beat as he realized what she was saying. This wasn't just about the girl's past. This was about the future of the galaxy. Chapter 4. The Final Choice. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on Caleb's chest as the girl turned back to the holographic projection, her fingers moving quickly across the glowing map. Her focus was absolute, but Caleb could see the pain in her eyes, the burden she carried in knowing that the fate of an entire galaxy rested in their hands. The girl's ancestors, the lost civilization of Xipheron, had been caught in the aftermath of a catastrophe, one that had almost obliterated them. And now, Caleb realized, the danger had not passed. It had only been dormant. The darkness had not gone away. It had simply waited for the right moment to resurface. Caleb stepped closer, his mind racing. What do we do? How can we stop this? The girl's eyes flicked to him, a flicker of fear in her gaze. I don't know, but I believe we can. I know we can, she said, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. There are ancient weapons hidden within the galaxy, powerful enough to stop what's coming. My people built them, hid them away when the war began, but now, they're scattered, lost to the stars. If we can find them, if we can unlock their secrets, we might have a chance. Caleb's thoughts whirled. He had no idea how to navigate a galaxy this vast, filled with secrets and dangers he couldn't even begin to comprehend. But one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead, he couldn't let the girl face it alone. She had already carried the burden of her people's destruction for far too long. And now, together, they would carry the hope for their future. We'll find them, Caleb said, his voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. We'll stop this. The girl nodded, her expression filled with both determination and uncertainty. She had led him here, to the heart of her people's lost civilization, and now, together, they would take the next step toward a future filled with uncertainty, but also with a faint hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could right the wrongs of the past. The holographic map shifted again, zooming in on a distant star system, a place that had been marked with an unfamiliar symbol. "This is our first stop," the girl said. "The first of many places where the weapons are hidden. But we'll need to hurry. We don't have much time." Caleb took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "Let's go. We have a galaxy to save." And with that, they set off on a journey that would take them beyond the stars, into the unknown, where the fate of the galaxy of their world hung in the balance. Together, they would uncover the secrets of Xiphoron, find the weapons that could stop the coming darkness, and face whatever challenges the universe had in store. For the first time since he had landed on Xiphoron, Caleb felt like he had a purpose. And no matter what lay ahead, he knew one thing. He would stand by the girl's side, for she was not just the last of her people. She was the future of the galaxy, and together, they would forge a new destiny.